sidetracked with
I'm
DevOps managers. All they do is do metrics.
Yeah, exactly.
On this episode of the DevOps Roundup, we talk about what is a DevOps engineer and why we don't think it's a real title.
It
Please
is
make sure
not a real title.
Well, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. Please make sure you hit a like, and let's get into it. Why is DevOps engineer not a real title for you, Sean?
Because DevOps encompasses so much that you're not going to have one person, one engineer, be able to do soup to nuts for DevOps. They're not going to be able to do all the project management, the version control, the CI/CD, the platform engineering, the deployments, the cloud infrastructure. You're not going to have one person to do that. So
but then why is it okay to have a software engineer? Because even that currently we have back end, front end, right? There's different focuses within software engineering. But
yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to argue in favor of having a software engineer either. I would say my argument falls down that way as well. But at what point do we just want to have a generic title to be able to talk to your neighbor when they ask you, what do you do?
I'm an engineer.
Yeah, I'm an engineer, and that's actually didn't think we're going to talk about that part in this, but when I'm in an elevator, you have you have your typical elevator speech. So someone comes into the elevator, you're in there, they try to make small talk. So what do? I have two elevator speeches. I have one that I give to someone who I feel is in the industry and is not talking down to anybody and explains what I do. And then I have one that I tell, people that I don't believe are in the industry. And sometimes that trips me up, because, a elderly woman will come in. Oh, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a software engineer. And then they unload because, well, they just did, 30 years at Boeing or something. And then they completely know, what I need, what I
you don't tell people that you make computers go beep, beep, bop, beep, bop, beep, beep.
beep. No, I've never used that as my elevator speech. But typically,
have you ever heard? There's a guy. Oh man, James Whitaker. He used to work at Microsoft and at Google. And he had this great thing. So the story goes like this: he's in the bathroom. He works at Google. He's in the bathroom up in Seattle, and Larry Page walks in and stands next to the stall next to him, breaks bro code, and doesn't space it out or anything. Goes straight to the stall next to him, and Larry Page goes, "So what do you do?" Right? And this guy Whitaker's response is, "I've been saving the world from Internet Explorer since 2008." Or whenever Chrome came out. And he was so, like, Larry Page was just so impressed because he's like, he could have said, I built software, right? I'm an engineer or whatever. But he's like, I've been saving the world from Internet Explorer. And I think this is kind of the spirit of what you're trying to get to at the end of this, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You need to be able to, tell your neighbor what you do without having to get into, too much
the detail.
So do we really need to have a title, front-end engineer, back-end engineer? The DBAs already have their own title. But yeah, I would say that this argument holds true for DevOps as well. In fact, DevOps is even a bigger spectrum because it includes your DBAs and your software engineers front and back and sideways and your cloud folks and your SREs and your platform engineer guys and your security.
I mean, when I was a DevOps engineer, I was on paper a software engineer that did DevOps. And so that in itself was confusing, right? And then what happens if you're more on the infrastructure side? So I had a buddy on my team who he didn't write a single piece of code, but he was setting up the servers. Like he was physically, creating fiber cables and crimping.
DevOps engineer, yeah.
So
he was carrying servers in and out of a lab and hard drives and things like that.
And crimping cables and stuff. And so does that not make you a DevOps engineer because you're not?
That's part of DevOps. That can be part of DevOps. There's really no reason why it shouldn't be.
And I had another buddy who specialized in automations. He was our scripter. He knew how to script the heck out of everything. Like he knew Bash and he knew how to turn anything into a script.
Yeah, and that's a great stepping off point to become the larger DevOps engineer, which shouldn't exist. But because that's kind of, I got my start in version control, but I quickly moved to process automation, which was build automation and basically automating all the things, which became a core concept in DevOps. But that's only one path into DevOps, which is why I'm really not in favor of someone saying that, hey, we're a DevOps,
team.
Yeah, well, that's what I dislike even more, is building a DevOps team. A DevOps engineer, okay, I can live with it because we were talking earlier. A lot of recruiters think they know what DevOps engineer means, and depending on the company they're recruiting for, that might mean automation engineer, might mean the cloud custodian,
Yeah.
But
It opens you up to failing to meet expectations within your company, because if your manager has a specific vision of what a DevOps engineer should do, and your skill set is something completely different,
yeah,
um, it,
right,
it, it,
yeah,
it
that definitely, you're 100% right, and it goes to, when you interview for a job, it shouldn't be a one-way interview. You need to be interviewing them too, but you got to be careful with that, because if you walk in and say, "Oh, hi, Mr. Hiring Manager, what's your definition of DevOps?" that might not be the best first approach.
yeah. But one still though, this has bitten me in the butt, where I got hired for a specific position in a very specific title, which I believe I firmly did the job very, very well. But my manager had a different expectation of what that role should do. And that expectation of that role was heavily governed by his roles and responsibilities, because him and I happened to share the same title. He was just the manager or a more senior person, and I was, the individual contributor. But because I didn't do the same activities and perform the same duties that he was performing, I got to fail to meet expectations, even though based on the job rec, based on what the recruiter had set out, based on what I signed up for, based on my skill set, I thought I did a phenomenal job.
Well, so there's a lot to unpack in that. Clearly, I put a lot of blame on the manager. The manager probably had many times to correct, or direct you, before it was review time. He should have set strong expectations at the beginning, so that you would understand what is accepted, and then you would have a that would be an opportunity for you to say, well, wait a minute, this is what I signed up for, you may or may not have issues with what he thinks you should be doing. Especially if you signed a contract to do a particular job based off what the how the interview went and what the recruiter told you. But anyway, that should have all been handled at the management level. And so, maybe he was just too junior of a manager.
That's a common problem that I see, especially with smaller companies, right? Where you either outlive, like especially in startups, right?
Mhm.
You outlive the senior people, and somebody's got the job, so you're the only one that didn't get fired or left because you didn't want to keep.
Mhm.
I feel like in startups, like a lot of people leave because they just can't deal with the uncertainty, right? And there's chaos, and so people leave and they kind of leave a path, and so you're like, well, I'll deal with it.
Yeah.
And you grow, you get into these positions, but you weren't designed. Like it takes a specific kind of skill to manage people.
Yeah, it does.
Which now we got to talk about DevOps engineering managers. Should those
Do we?
people should they be technical? Should they be more people focused? Like, what are your thoughts there?
Well, DevOps, and we probably haven't talked about this part of DevOps much. I know we mentioned it in early episodes, but DevOps is there's three facets of DevOps. It's people, processes or practices, and tools. And we're always going to be heavy talking about the tools because that's what we play with all the time, and we roll up our sleeves and dive into the tools. But the people is a very important aspect. And we kind of touched on this with mental health in the workplace a little bit, which probably should be its own episode. And we probably should invite a mental health expert in during that.
Whenever you're ready to invite people, let me know.
Well, I think once we hit 100 subscribers, that sounds like a nice.
So, folks, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, now is the time to help us hit our goals. Hit that subscribe button.
Yeah. We'll start inviting people to come in and chat with us once we hit around 100. I think that's a nice round number. So I don't know if it means anything other than it's a nice round number, but
that's another thing that we'll probably have to get into one day, is to talk about DevOps metrics, because what is a metric if not something superficial?
Oh, once you define a metric, everyone works to cheat the metric.
I was watching this lady talk about corporate America, and she's like, I gave up on corporate America and I quit because her job, she was a product manager, and like her job was to figure out how much money the company was going to make on delivering a new feature that the engineers were working on.
Sure.
And she's like, nobody knows. You can't tell. You can't predict the future on somebody's going to buy or not buy a new feature that your software can do, right? But her job was to figure out a systematic way of coming up with the number. And then the worst part was that
they know the number.
No, that your forecasted number, and then they compare it versus the actual number. And then like they don't match, and then you'd have to come up with an excuse as to why they don't match. And like, well, because it was a fantasy number to begin with. And so in general, all kinds of numbers, I always have a huge problem with them, because like, what is a number if not just an arbitrary number?
Yeah. I think I'm on board with you on that. Trying to think thinking of some stories to add here, and the first three that came to mind are stories I can't tell.
You can't bleep out the places and the people.
Yeah, and because
Jimmy used to work for me.
That particular industry I have in mind has this problems with metrics all the time, and metrics is a good segue into the feedback loop. So the metrics that you use in your feedback loop are to help improve the process and improve the whatever product that you're doing, but not necessarily the metrics you may be thinking of, which is metrics created to
measure DevOps performance.
Yeah, exactly. To fully support like agile processes, and to try to make your software team or your I don't want to say DevOps team, but make your organization as efficient as possible. And typically what will happen is, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, as soon as a metric is defined, people will start working ways to gain that metric.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot.
And then on the opposite side of that, management will use those metrics to punish the team members for not meeting the metrics, or they'll basically use it to create more of a sweatshop type atmosphere, where a good software development organization should be treated more as an art form than a sweatshop. Now those are two drastic extremes, and usually land in somewhere in the middle. But you want your software engineers to have some sort of freedom to create, and not necessarily just be burning down story points.
Yeah, but I think bringing it back to the why a DevOps engineer is not a real title, like for positions, right? And if this is going to be your job or your role, you will most likely have some metric or something to gauge your level of performance. And this is, again, echoing what we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes here, which is, how do you hit a target that is undefined, right? If you're a platform engineer, or you're a site reliability engineer, or you're the cloud engineer, or you're the infrastructure engineer, those are all going to be different goals, different targets.
Oh yeah. Well, if you're the SRE, so basically SRE's role is to make sure that your system stays available, so it never goes down. So if your system never went down, but you only received like one release in a 6-month period, are you a good SRE, or or if you're an SRE, that your system went down 10 times in 6 months, but you received 800 releases in that 6 months. Who's the better SRE?
Yeah. It's kind of like there's an experiment of quality of pictures. Have you heard about this little experiment here or assignment that a professor gave?
I'll go ahead and
Yeah.
explain.
He gave his class 50% of the room had to go take 10 pictures, right?
Okay.
And they had to submit their best picture, but they can only take 10 pictures. And the other half of the room had to submit their same 10 pictures, but they had to take 1,000 pictures.
Okay.
Like, and so the room that had submitted that had the 1,000 pictures that they had to take submitted the 10 most beautiful pictures ever because they practiced over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Whereas the other 10, they agonized over the 10 because they knew they could only take 10 pictures. And so they perched on that decision forever and not making a decision because of, so it's very similar concept, right? Where those metrics can really hinder you or make you grow. And beauty perception is a very mischievous thing.
It definitely is. And now we started down the path to start ripping apart a DevOps manager, and we kind of got off track.
I tried to with DevOps managers, all they do is do metrics.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the DevOps manager should be more focused on the people aspect of DevOps. And that goes into the whole mental health, which is, I think, how we got sidetracked off into metrics.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for taking it down his path.
Yeah. So let's not go down that path again. But they're the ones that need to be worried about, the organization, how do we shuffle the chairs on the Titanic, and those aspects of the overall organization to have a DevOps, practice inside the organization. And that's where DevOps managers should be. Is it where they always are? No.
I'll tell you where I've had. So when I joined one of my earlier companies, when I was in DevOps, my manager had set up the infrastructure. My manager had set up the applications and the tools. And I butted so much with him because he had a specific way that the applications and the services were to be rendered to that customer because it was his baby. And he was very actively involved. Basically, I got zero people's development out of that manager and was always just told you're doing this wrong because it wasn't his way of doing the tool. And that was very, very hard for me because I grew up before I jumped into this DevOps space. My managers were my coaches. My managers had no idea what the heck I was doing, right? They were there to make sure that as a human being, and as a from a career perspective, I excelled, right? That I knew where my next opportunities were.
That's a good role for a DevOps manager.
Yeah, but my other DevOps manager, he was there to make sure we did the tool the way he set it up, and it stayed that way. And I got zero.
So release team, DevOps tool specialists. We provide professional services and software reselling around the leading software DevOps tools like Atlassian, GitLab, GitHub, JFrog, and others. To talk with us about DevOps, here's our contact information. Please call 866-887-0489 or via email at info@releaseteam.com.
That way. And I got zero people stuff from him, but a whole lot of you're not doing Jira right because we don't make team managed projects. and maybe that's where I got it from.
So that's where you hate team managed projects.
It just sucked that as an engineer, my creative, like I've always felt that engineering is not a very creative art, right? But it really is because you can get very creative with your solutions. And I hated that I couldn't think outside the box because it had to be his box. And so again, that I wouldn't say that that's a good DevOps manager.
No. But the industry is littered with bad examples of both DevOps engineers and DevOps managers. But I've been in that situation before where and now we go back to talking about a persona that we talked way too much about in an earlier episode, the cowboy. When the cowboy gets promoted to a manager, he acts exactly that way. Everyone that comes in underneath him, has to do things exactly the way he does it. and that kind of sounds like the scenario that you
that
were
you're
in.
in. But it
Yeah.
really does suck though, right? Because again, not only is the title confusing, not only do you not know what you're supposed to do, because every company can have different definitions of it. Different people are doing different responsibilities. You're just it's such a very messy title and a messy way to think about it. But even worse is when you can't live up to somebody's expectations, right? Because they have a perception of what they expect us to be. And again, it's just not communicated to you. But there's such a disconnect between again that reality and then what HR and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
recruiters are pitching.
HR is going to call this a title, so we're stuck. We're just going to have to live with it and understand that, yeah, DevOps means so many different things because it does encompass pretty much the
Yeah.
entire, the entire organization. That you just have to work that out with the manager or before you start the
Yeah.
position.
And
Understand it.
and before we close this episode out, again, make sure you hit that subscribe button. But have candid conversations with your leadership team, right? Like a good manager should be there to see how they can help you grow in your career, not just what you can do for them. And so if you're struggling or something doesn't feel quite right, don't be quiet about it either, because the squeaky wheel ends up getting the oil is what I've learned throughout my career, right? And so if you I wouldn't complain, I'd be professional about it and go, hey, something's not right, something doesn't fit. Can I try this? Can I go to a different project or something? But don't just deal with the fact that you've been dealt a crappy card.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fold
And,
them
and
and
there's
go
definitely
again.
support groups. Reach out to us. We feel you.
We'll turn this into tea time with bring all your DevOps horror stories. Come on, come on the show.
Yeah. All right. Well, everyone, till next week.
Don't forget to subscribe.